citizen. Same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to the People-Powered Planet podcast. I'm the host, Arthur Kanegis, and each week with Melanie, Bennett, we host special meetings where we look at solutions to some of the world's problems. There's so many wonderful films and shows and so on about all the deep problems in the world. Our special focus is on solutionaries. How do we give the people the power to begin to change all this? And today we're going to have a very special guest who's going to come on in a moment. You see him on the screen here, Soushiant Zanganehpour. Before we get to him, I want to briefly introduce another special guest who's with us, one of the other winners. This Swedish millionaire put up a multi-million-dollar prize for the best new ideas on better ways to govern our planet. He thought one of the reasons why things are such a mess is governance is out of control. There's no good system for global governance. So out of this prize, we have actually two of the three winners. Arthur Dahl, I'll introduce him briefly. Arthur and our friend Merle Lefkoff were at that event, and she's been working with him. Merle Lefkoff is one of the board members of Future Wave, an organization that is sponsoring these meetings. And Arthur's proposal has to do with UN reform and other things. I'll let him take just a minute to tell us about his winning proposal before then I'm going to introduce Barbara Mueller here and Soushiant. Go ahead, Arthur.
Well, what we did was very complimentary to what Soushiant did, in the sense there were three of us. Augustus Claris, who's a distinguished international economist with the World Bank and the World Economic Forum and so on, and Maya Grof, who's an international lawyer working on the Hague International Conventions for some decades. And I'm a scientist, an environmental specialist working on climate change and all of those issues. We said, what do we have to fix in the UN to make it work for the 21st century? What would be reasonable? Ideas like with not being so far out of reach that it would not be possible, could we show there's actually going to be possible to fix the system by applying at the global level the same approaches to governance we accept as normal at the national level? Legislation, judiciary, and executive to apply things for those areas that need to be done globally. So we prepared, what would we fix in the General Assembly, replace the Security Council with something that works better, expand the responsibilities for global climate change and other global issues that have gone beyond any kind of national governance, and sort of imagine how this might work in the 21st century.
Perfect.
We won the proposal on a very short proposal. We then wrote a 550-page book describing in great detail how this would work. So, it's available from Cambridge University Press, free of charge online. And I won't say anything more for those who want to go deeper. It's all available, in our book. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing what Soushiant has to say about where he's going with his proposal. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So here's what we'll do. We'd love to have you on as the next guest. We'll schedule you to come on as well. But before we do, let's urge people to go ahead and buy your book so they'll be prepared to hear you here on the podcast. So tell us again the name of the book and how people get it so they can bone up and be ready for when we bring you on the show.
Well, it's Global Governance in the Emergence of Global Institutions of the 21st Century, published by Cambridge University Press. And so you go to their website and go to the title of the book, and you can then download a PDF copy of it, or you can order the printed version at $120, whatever it is. So I don't have the link immediately at hand to put on the chat.
That's fine.
Okay, well, talking.
Yeah, we can get it in the chat there. All right, well, that's very special to have you as a guest. And now, actually, as I'm about to introduce Soushiant, I want to first mention that we brought Soushiant before to speak to the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. Barbara Mueller is on the phone here on the Skype, and she and Rudy they brought together this incredible club where each week we have fascinating speakers on key topics of creating peace. And her husband was a great believer in something new. Actually, if Melanie would call it up on the screen, her husband said that when we look at all these incredible problems in the world and the way we're plunging toward ecocide and what I'd call nucocide and all these horrible things, that there actually is a superpower that can save us. Now, here's what he said. The merging, surging voice of the people of the world are the new superpower. Now, this is the United Nations former Assistant Secretary General saying there is a superpower. And you know, when he said that, it reminded me very much of when I talked to Leonardo DiCaprio. You'll see him in our movie, The World Is My Country. I asked him, you know, in all the movies, always at the last minute, just when things look darkest and there's no hope, a hero comes along and saves the day. Who's the hero who can save the day? And he said, the hero is you, the people of the planet. We're the ones who have to save it. And that's why I'm so excited to bring on our guest, Soushiant, because he, you know, here's the thing. All the people in the world want something better than what these governments are doing, and yet it's not happening. Why? Is there certain tools that we the people need to be able to move from here to there so that we unleash that superpower and give it the power that it deserves? So with thanks to Barbara and to her husband for that, I'm now going to introduce Soushiant Zanganehpour. As you've heard, he's one of the winners of the Global Challenge Foundation prize for, you know, really creative ideas. His proposal is for using bottom-up democracy. Well, let's just have him explain it. So tell us, Soushiant, first of all, right now, you know, we talk to young people everywhere, and they just see the world as so dismal. Even America is plunging toward tyrannical rule. We see just at the time when our leaders need to be really taking forward moves to save our planet from ecocide, you know, from the destruction of the very environment that makes life possible on Earth. We see rulers taking us in the opposite direction, tearing up agreements, pulling out of the Paris Accords. How can your proposal give us the power to do something about these incredible global threats? Tell us a little bit more about your proposal and how it might empower that, bring to power that new superpower.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Arthur. And so nice to see, sorry, both Arthurs on the phone. Say hi to Maya from me and the others. Really happy you guys have made progress and turned your ideas into a book. I think this, I mean, let me give some context before trying to answer your question. We live in a world where the largest demographic population in most countries are below the age of 35. They're the largest proportion of the workforce very soon and the largest proportion of the voting population. They grew up in a time where they faced multiple crises, from the fall of the Berlin Wall all the way to several financial meltdowns and looming kind of existential crises around, climate change. They grew up in an internet first era and more so expect things to work the way they work when you're ordering something from a private company. They don't sort of have the same tolerance for latency that we may have, given the way we developed institutions before. They expect things to work fast, be transparent, be inclusive. And in many ways, it was with this spirit and with this intention that we put our proposal together for how institutions might function differently if they were designed in a different, with a different mindset.
That's exactly what Albert Einstein called for. He said, you never solve problems basically the same old mindset that created them. You have to step into a new mindset to do it. So I'm so happy you're coming up with a new mindset. So tell us more.
Look, this was like beyond the thought exercise for me. I started down the path of building a company around the technology and ideas that we were trying to bring to life well before the challenge. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to close my window. There's a lot of background noise coming in, and I want to make sure I have everyone's attention.
Yes, please take care of that. And while he's doing it, yeah, both Einstein and Buckminster Fuller said the same kind of thing. You've got to step into a whole new invention. You don't fight the old, you come up with something new. So go ahead with your more about.
Yeah, so I won't labor the point too much, but just for context, like I was a director in a large foundation before. Prior to that, I worked in many different organizations, and I experienced the limitations of top-down decision making while I was there. We every year around the strategy and budgeting review phase, we had some very, very strong personalities drive their ideas down through the organization and into programming. And ultimately, this process was distasteful to experience and led to really poor outcomes for our organization. Because the people that were in charge of actually implementing a lot of these programs had very little say in how they might be designed, how they might be measured, how they might be shaped. And this got me thinking, like, what if we had a marketplace of ideas that were sourced from various people inside the organization that were anonymous, that could sort of compete and collaborate and improve upon each other to find the best solution for the problem that we faced, versus decisions being driven top down by one person or another. I thought this would be more inclusive, it would be more meritocratic, and would maybe help us expand learning across the organization. While I was, getting excited about this idea, there were examples of this type of process coming to life in other areas of the world, not necessarily in policy, but in product innovation. There was a really famous example of a website called Quirky. If you look it up, you might see it was one of the first companies coming out of Silicon Valley to raise over $100 million in 2007, 2008, before this kind of explosion of finance and whatnot. And they had done this based on a methodology of, you can crowdsource brand new product innovation ideas through a process, and those can be vetted at the end of this process for market creation. And out of it, they invented thousands of new products from everyday kind of DIY people, generated 10 million or so in recurring royalty payments to those people out of thin air, out of a process. Wow. My thinking was, could we combine a lot of the user experience and kind of decision science methodology to apply it towards policy problems? A lot of the issues that we face in our cities are very similar to what people face in other cities. Could we combine that learning in one sort of repository and have Lego pieces almost to select from to co-create our own solutions to our problems? So I got really excited about this, and I made the connection that the thing I had experienced in my private life, in my work life, was very similar to what I was experiencing in our public institutions, where the dominant model is your choice of participation. Your options are elect somebody, disengage, or protest. And when you look at the spectrum of opportunities and the amount of expertise that individuals have, it seems like a pretty dumb set of choices, given the times we live in. So why not create marketplaces for policy solutions from citizens to the complex problems we face? Why not create metrics and leverage technologies to help find better solutions to our problems? Why do we need to give our agency entirely to one person for a 4-year, 6-year, 2-year term, carte blanche to act on every matter as a generalist? It just didn't seem like, given the way the world was heading, this was the right model that was going to lead to better outcomes for us. So I started to, I took this idea to Singularity University, and they're looking for technologies and exponential technologies that can impact 1 billion lives in a 10-year span. And my suggestion was, look, the way data is exploding, the amount of data we're going to have access to, the data footprints of our smart devices, and computational power, like AI is going to play a very, very big role in helping us create solutions and kind of chip away at the importance or the reliance on experts. As it becomes more powerful, it democratizing access to artificial intelligence for solution creation will give us a lot of augmented skills. So if you combine that with a decision science and these, you know, marketplaces for ideas, maybe we could replace the need for politicians altogether. Maybe we can replace the need for middlemen or repurpose them into different functions. And so I got really excited about this, and I pitched the idea of, you know, I want to build software that replaces the need for politicians and recreates democracy. I think this will impact more than 1 billion people in 10 years. I went down the road and we started to, you know, this was during the time when Brexit just happened, and this was sadly right before Donald Trump's election. No one thought these things were real. Everyone thought, oh, you know, people don't have power and whatnot, and they, you know, their frustrations are normal. It is what it is, and this is how the system works. And these two, I think, challenges to popular belief were, I think, really accelerated the idea that maybe other ways of doing things are possible in addition to, you know, populism. So, you know, don't want to delve too much into those days, but fast forward a bit, we took the idea to the Global Challenges Foundation, and it was, in addition to an idea marketplace supported by AI, it was a series of other technologies that help us, for example, simulate these winning ideas in digital environment using real world data to help us understand the unintended consequences of one idea versus another. This is something you would do as a strategic exercise, as an expert. We do this in scenario planning and other things. We did this tons as a strategy consultant, and there are very important frameworks for it. But
wow,
these
wouldn't that be exciting for people to be able to, you know, not be talking just which politician you want, but okay, which ideas are actually going to work better for our planet, and then see them played out, see the models played out, see what the consequences are. How much better informed would people's choices be if you opened up this marketplace of ideas? They didn't just have to choose between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but they could really be engaged in this process. That's very exciting.
It is very, very exciting. And it comes with a lot more responsibility on behalf of citizens too. And this is something we can come back to. I think we're in the wrong environment politically and socially to do a lot of experiments in this at a large scale. I think we need to, like, there's so much mistrust and vitriol that the chance of things going wrong is really high. But anyways, we can come back to that in a sec. But in terms of technology, there are already really great advancements back in 2016 and 17 by IBM Watson that had a trade-off analysis tool that would allow you to see the trade-offs in the quantifiable trade-offs between two choices that you wanted to make in a marketplace. And already urban planners and others are using simulated environments to see what would happen if they change traffic patterns, or if they, you know, put a street light somewhere else and things like this. So it's just, you know, we're just building on top of things that already exist and already in motion, but for a very different purpose. It's not to give the experts a little bit more support, but it's to really democratize access to who gets to propose ideas and make, you know, the more ideas we have, hopefully the wider the spectrum of choices, the more we can limit bias in those selection of choices and hopefully make better quality decisions as a consequence. So that's the idea, really.
What I like about that is it's kind of a self-correcting function. It's one of the things that happens in open source computer programs, is that of course some people make errors and they'll go off in wrong directions, but the mechanism is built such that it kind of self-corrects to the course that works best for people, rather than the worst, lowest common denominator takes them to the top.
Yeah, and this is really a function of what metrics you use to determine best. You know, what we saw in a lot of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing examples was that the metrics they used were quite binary and quite crude, meaning that they would use voting as the number one source of truth. So if an idea got popular momentum and somebody, you know, had a lot of popularity and could galvanize their community around their idea, it didn't mean that the idea was any good. It just meant that they were a great promoter of that idea. And so you'd see a lot of ideas escalate to a management review or to a policy review, and they were filled with holes, filled with biases, filled with confirmation biases and other sorts of things. And so we started to, like, since winning the award, we built a prototype. We implemented the prototype in 7, 8 different large institutions, large companies, Bosch, Etihad Airways, Doctors Without Borders. We've implemented with 2 governments in South America, with the government of Chihuahua in the city of Juarez, Mexico, and with the government of Chile to crowdsource their national climate change law. And what we saw is that you need to have metrics that balance the popularity contest to try to find bias early. So some of our metrics look at the diversity of input into a proposal to make sure that it's well supported, and you know, it has opinions from different segments of society. Other metrics look at the amount of negativity or negative feedback is included in that idea, so that the criticisms are addressed really, really early on before an idea sort of moves up the chain.
That is so important. That really gives me a lot of hope to hear about that kind of mechanism, because we see so much of those distortions in society right now.
Reading your questions over, I think, like, there is an enormous urgency in front of us. Like, we don't have much time with regards to the climate change agenda. We don't have a lot of time for U-turns, and I think the choices that we will have left will be very difficult structural changes we need to make. And sadly, I don't think a system like ours presents a solution today to the types of urgency we face. But it could, and the way that it could is if we're able to prove, and not just us, but other people that are working in this field of decentralized governance and you know, inclusive decision making, are able to prove that this model of decision making can produce as good solutions as the opposite way, the top-down driven way, then we can start to implement it in more consequential environments. Consequential environments such as, you know, mayors of cities using this to crowdsource policy solutions from their citizens, beyond, you know, what park name to change and things around education policy, things around climate adaptation policy, and other sorts of things. And if there are political parties that come to life saying, we don't have candidates, we have a system for decision making. All the members who are part of our political party have access to our idea marketplace, and whatever the ideas that emerge from this will become our platform. And us as candidates are the delivery mechanism for this platform. That's, I think, a constructive way of changing our current day institutions and structures.
Wasn't a model like that actually tried in Italy, where they had candidates running who pledged to follow the kind of consensus decisions that occurred?
There have been, not only in Italy, but in Iceland. There was a friend of ours, Adam, in Australia, who invented My Vote, who implemented this in various sorts of places. Yeah, and prior to that, I think the first party or the first experiment for this was in Argentina with Santiago Siri and Pia Mancini, who invented the Parti de la Red, which was the internet party. Okay. And they only got like 2% of the popular vote. the idea is there. It's the people's, what we've noticed, and what we learned through a lot of our experiments is our culture is an enormous barrier to implementing a system like this. And by culture, I mean our fear of what might happen if we decentralize power. Where might society take us? This is an enormous fear for normal people as well as for decision makers.
Yeah,
And
people are fearful of mob rule. Why wouldn't it descend into mob rule? You know, somebody who sways the
yeah,
masses go away.
yeah.
So how do you prevent it from going to that direction? Is that's built into the system, tools to stop that?
So I think, look, that there are a few things that need to happen in sequence for you to contain how populist and how scary a system like this could become. One, you need very clever metrics, metrics that balance out popularity with merit, to help you source truth from folks and have a debate around that truth. And I think, you know, not to overemphasize anyone's success, but I think Wikipedia has been able to do a really good job of moderating truth in a world where truth is, you know, under assault every day. I think there's a lot to learn from how their methodology and their moderation processes worked.
Yes.
The second thing is it needs to be implemented in non-political environments first. It needs to be implemented in places where the decisions are, there are a lot of unknowns around them, but there may not be super high consequence decisions, so that you begin to de-risk the model and get people familiar with this process. And in many, many ways, although our intention was to build this operating system for how a city might function that replaces our way of doing things, we're testing it inside companies that are making innovation decisions, low political risk decisions, high consequence in terms of cost, but low in terms of political risk. And these are ways that you can sort of slowly build up to making people familiar and trusting of the process.
Excellent. Well, I think that's so important. And I also am so glad that you mentioned the culture of shift. And one of my dreams, as I've said to you, was that I think that some of these exciting ideas you're mentioning, I'd love to see them implemented in an ongoing story, like a Netflix series or a feature film where young people could each week dwell in a future where we have that kind of future. They could experience it virtually. And as they experience it virtually, it would become more like, hey, why don't we really do this in the world? Do you see possibilities moving in that direction for the cultural shift that's needed?
I think it's very, very, very important. I think people need to imagine how a world could be, and they need to see the optimistic version of that first before they, you know, a friend and someone I look up to, Cesar Hidalgo, said this when he was he gave his TED Talk a couple of years ago about AI to replace politicians. And he said, you know, you implement a system or you produce a system, and for every yes, you'll have 1,000 no's or something along those lines. You can, for every solution, someone will find a problem. And that's fine. It's good. We don't want to break society by testing a new solution, but we also must accept that the current way that we do things has some like unbelievable structural limitations. And the consequences of the structural limitations are unsustainable moving forward. If we don't converge on this understanding, then, then it's very hard to imagine a more optimistic future. I think video and Netflix and series like a white mirror versus a black mirror can really show us what the beneficial uses of exponential technologies might be, so that people like myself, people that are maybe earlier in their careers, spend their productive time building those technologies and bringing different things to the world.
Wow.
When I was at Singularity, one of the biggest realizations for me was, Isaac Asimov's novels and the vivid imagery of a robotic future, and many other contemporaries of his time, in many, many ways, shaped the imagination of engineers from 30 years ago, who started to build technologies that went down towards this roadmap. I mean, we have the same opportunity to do that for positive world-changing technologies using mediums like Netflix and short stories and documentaries. And I think we should absolutely do that.
Wow. Yeah, that's what Star Trek inspired so many people in that direction. And things are invented there, then became everyday reality. So I think it's so important that you're envisioning this and that you're testing it out and that you're beginning to move it forward. Now, one of the other big opportunities I see coming up is, the UN Secretary General has called for a worldwide conversation on the future we want, the UN we need. And of course, all of your three winning proposals, feed into this idea of envisioning and creating that future. And shortly, there is people have kind of forgotten about the nuclear war issue, but it actually, we're now, there's $1 trillion program ahead for new nuclear weapons. There were really the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which had us at a figurative 7 minutes to midnight of the end of life on Earth, has now moved it up to 100 seconds, both because of climate change and because of tearing up these arms control agreements and other dangers in the world. But at the same time, on the opposite side, most of the world's nations have now signed a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, and it's about to be ratified by enough people to become international law binding on those nations, but through the UN Charter and its rules actually really for the Earth. Is there I would love to envision a way that this popular groundswell democracy could work in concert with the nations who've passed that ban to help implement a future in which we begin to really take seriously our responsibilities under international law to preserve our planet from ecocide and what I'd call nucocide, doing ourselves in. Do you see any possibilities of working in association with other people at the UN or other places who are interested in your ideas?
We have some advisors who are advising the current Secretary General on what platforms and processes to use to try to increase inclusion and democratization of things. And we are in touch about this. I wouldn't say it's I mean, they move at a snail's pace, to be very objective about this. And I wish they took these things a bit more seriously, and I wish that they put their resources around experiments that will increase their legitimacy, in my opinion, because I think their legitimacy suffers when they're slow to act on issues that matter, like so. I think that we're one of many tools we can exercise to exert and demand structural change. If you remember years ago, the president of Bolivia, he used the tools of law to try to confer rights to Mother Earth, so that the governments and government entities, as well as multinational corporations, don't abuse their rights and create externalities that ultimately the national government needs to clean up. And I think working in concert with lawmakers, with other technology providers, with jurisdictions of people that believe in this way, I think a lot of young mayors that are coming up or younger politicians, they will get this, and that they, building a coalition of folks that are demanding structural change is sort of the way to move this agenda forward. Our job is to continue building the technology and de-risking it. It's super hard to do the coalition building on top of, running a company, trying to survive COVID,
Right.
producing thought leadership, and all of that at the same time. So,
Well, so that's
but
where
yeah,
others can pitch in to help you, because yes, clearly your job is so important of like creating these tools and testing them, and then maybe getting this whole Rotary network mobilized in helping with that. I mean, they have extensive worldwide reach, and I think they could be maybe a key to kind of building that political support for it. So we need both the network to organizations and people, and we need the network out to key people in the film community. Um, I think that we should probably throw this open to well, before we throw up the questions, let me ask you just one more question myself, and then I'm going to have other people think about your questions. And if you have a question, you can click on participants and click raise hands. Melanie will be recognizing you later. And I think if you don't have that, you're on a phone or something, you can just, if she sees you raising your finger, she might call on you. But as you're thinking of your questions, I want to ask you a big one, and that is, you've talked about the role of artificial intelligence in this, and so many people are rightly frightened that artificial intelligence, could take over and get out of control, and if not programmed right, it could decide that we humans are the are the pests on the planet, that the solution to these problems is just get past these humans and we'll do just fine. What keeps AI from actually turning into a force for ill rather than to help serve this model?
there are so many answers to give you on that. A bit more context. I think those fears, in some ways, are blown out of proportion, but in some ways, they're valid. Yesterday, we had the very first AI-generated op-ed produced in the Guardian newspaper. It was produced by Sam Altman and Elon Musk's brainchild called OpenAI. It's an open artificial intelligence experiment, $100 million of funding that has gone into helping create a open, accessible API that generates text based on inputs of sentiment and words and other things from people. It generated an entire op-ed by itself. This is incredible, because imagine all of the frontline workers inside an organization that don't have really strong communication skills, but have very, very solid insights. Imagine all the people that are left out of the policymaking process that are the recipients of bad policy. Imagine them being to craft really clever sounding, important, objective pieces of legislature or winning proposals that show us different ways of doing things. I think this is also the power of AI, the AI to help us augment our communication skills and whatnot. I think for it to
see false narratives being created, which are sold to people, and doesn't this enhance the possibility of false narratives that actually, justify racism as saving America from an onslaught or whatever?
So this was a point I didn't mention, and I forgot to mention. I wanted to, in how you de-risk a technology or democratize technology. I think you need a rights-based framework in which all ideas need to fit in. I think ideas that undermine the human rights of other individuals are just simply not allowed. This is not a free market for any type of idea. If you want to undermine other people's right to existence, sorry, you don't get to participate. This is the framework. I think we need a human rights universal declaration of independence and human rights type of baseline to operate from. And on the issue of AI being manipulated, I think the people building the artificial intelligence, the engineers, their biases, the data sets that they're choosing, the intent that they're tagging their data, this all trains a model to behave in one way or another. And I think the more diverse the sources of people building them, and the more diverse the sources of data, the less likely we are to be driven in one biased direction over another.
I think that's so key, what you've mentioned about diversity. And what I'd like to see built into these systems is not saying to the people who, want to be racist, oh no, you can't participate, but rather putting them in a model that where for example, say you take people who are, totally racist, but in order to get more points to climb up in the impact of their score, they need to engage with somebody on the opposite side. Well, Arabs and Jews on opposite sides of the Palestinian dispute or anything else. And you have these certain tools like Barbara can tell us about compassionate communication, revolutionary conversations, and so on, but tools that you put these people together, and that they're not saying who's right and who's wrong, but okay, what is the basic thing each person here wants? What are their objectives in life? How do we find common ground? And the tool builds into it a common ground finding thing that breaks through and shifts these people inside. So it doesn't say, no, you're excluded. It says, okay, I take part in this, and yeah, I'm gonna make my point. I'm gonna get in there, but the more they're getting involved and they're learning, they're talking about their feelings, other people are, and the more they're finding themselves being transported into a new space and and the more they're seeing these models and played out, and they're saying, well, yeah, I was sure that was right, but actually now that I see that played out, I don't know, so I'm not so sure anymore. Something that shakes up their thinking. So instead of saying, oh no, you guys are out, you're not part of the system, saying, yeah, let's all play, but let's all play in a game that interactively brings us together, that helps us come to common realizations. Is there some way that kind of thing can be built into the democratization, bottom-up democracy system?
So it's a really, really good point. This is about the Dunning-Kruger effect of confirmation bias. It relates to that. And there's been some really important work done lately to try to figure out what actually helps change people's minds. In reality, when we're debating, we're not debating, we're sort of conclusion shopping. We've already come to some conclusion and we're looking for facts to support that, to drive a point home. And, breaking this narrative up, breaking the dynamic up to try to find common ground, requires more research. There was a fellow in, another guy, the inventor of My Vote, who had some clever mechanisms in his platform that said, if you're coming in there to just promote a point, like, we won't even let you vote or propose an idea before you've read the text. And so they had like a timer and a way of validating whether someone had read it, and they'd have to answer some questions before, and that would qualify them to make an informed opinion. These are mechanisms that you could use. Another was
climbing mechanisms where the more you acquire, interact with, the more your point has weight. So the more you want to do it. So you're drawn up toward a higher view. Yeah.
And in our case, like we even looked at constructing metrics or reputation around the degree to which you engaged with ideas you disliked, to show how open-minded you were. Like, how many ideas you were against have you read, have you commented on, have you engaged on? How many ideas that you disliked have you endorsed and supported, and trying to earn a reputation that way as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I think another very, very cool experiment is a company called Polis. I'm going to write them down here. And they have a experiment Taiwan and Uber crowdsourcing. They've been covered quite a bit, but this issue of having transportation law in a city adapt and evolve to include Ubers and Lyfts and other kinds of taxis. Obviously, this hurts their domestic workforce and domestic taxi companies, but consumers like this. So this is a divisive group of people. There's one side that's for it, one side against it. So they deployed this surveying system where they would ask a bunch of questions, and in the answers, doing natural language understanding and processing, they would try to find words and vernacular and things that was the basis of common ground. What was the shared concerns? What were the shared solutions? And they would show these in maps to people. And from this, the government, and with the help of citizens, helped crowdsource like not a pro or against policy, but a balanced, measured, inclusive policy that was progressive, but also took into consideration the concerns of the taxi industry, so that there was a, proper evolution. It was covered in MIT and BBC and other stuff. So there are other ways that we could be doing things, and we should try to look into this.
I'm so excited about your ideas and how we do that and how we build the interactive systems and tools to solve these problems. I want to throw this back to Melanie now to open this up for questions, because I'm sure many people in the audience are as excited as I am and wanting to ask you some comments or thoughts. Melanie, take it.
Hi, yes, oh my gosh, Soushiant, that's beautiful. And your comment about how we're looking to, we try to find facts to support our decisions we've already made. Incredible, everything was perfect what you said. We do have some quick questions. The first one is Meta Spencer. If you could go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Turn your camera on, Meta.
Okay.
We don't see you. Okay.
Yes.
And then maybe Merle will have a comment, or Barbara, but let's come to you first.
Okay. Yes, I think your comments toward the end have been very helpful in beginning to address the thing that haunts me lately, which is that in terms of actual good decision making, I grieve at the conclusion that democracy is simply not working now. That and the tension is between what you call merit and popularity, voting, etc. And I find this very disturbing because, of course, we now are in a state where people are, group dynamics mean that people are making their decisions sort of on the basis of supporting a football team or something rather than rational platforms. And so the question then is how to move people into, or how to balance that tendency or overcome that tendency with processes that will give you informed decision making, because the people who are mostly resentful now, the populist movement, are people who, as one of Tom Friedman's recent columnists suggested, that they're resentful of the fact they're looked down upon for not being well educated, and they're resentful against scientific research and so on. So I don't know how to build it into the system, but it seems to me we really have to overcome this failing to reestablish the importance of scientific or objective inquiry in decision making. How does your system propose to handle that issue?
What a good question. That tension is very, very apt. This tension between merit and popularity. And for me, witnessing Brexit, I used to live in the UK and left shortly before Brexit happened. What I saw was the decisions and the populism expressed by Brexit, and in many cases, I think Trump's election, was a politics of retribution. I think you have a class of people, a popular, a large demographic of individuals that have been silenced from participating. And they express their anger through these candidates and movements that were, claiming to clean up the swamp or, change the system, bring back order, make things better again, and all this sort of stuff. I think that the frequency of engagement would temper people's, strong expressions quite a bit. I think if people had more opportunities to engage, learn, express, that violent or irrational impact that we saw in the form of Brexit or Trump's election, maybe irrational to me, but irrational to other people, may be silenced quite a bit. I think it would be tempered quite a bit. I think you still have populist ideas in a platform like this, but if you see that merit wins, then you're more likely to, emulate your ideas towards finding those solutions. One example I would give beyond sort of musings is there are a lot of experiments done with the open government initiative and citizen assemblies. They were these citizen-driven policy change experiments in Holland as well as in Canada, where they had people on opposing sides of a policy idea, not forced, but kind of brought together for a period of 3 to 6 months to try to find common ground and figure out a policy decision. What they found before and after these experiments was eventually, like, some policy changes were suggested, mostly around legislative reform to the voting process at the municipal level. And in some ways, some of these favored one group versus another. It was very black and white. But because the process was fair, because there was no suspicious intervention, because everyone could be expressed and heard, the levels of trust, the acceptance of the policy, the adoption of those policies were way higher by people that ultimately didn't benefit from it. Again, because they saw something they trusted in, a process that they trusted in. And I kind of lean on these experiments to inform a lot of the hopes we have for, minimizing populism in platforms like this. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, we have Arthur Dahl. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you.
This is going to be hard. I don't know if I can answer this, okay?
Well, technology is a good solution for problems that have a scientific basis or engineering and so on and so forth. But how do you bring in an ethical dimension, or something that goes? You talked about some kind of a foundation to the system, human rights and so on and so forth. So how can the system have certain values in terms of justice and equity, leaving no one behind? Maybe even humility and moderation. That would means that there's these higher human values become part of the decision-making process, and also perhaps correct some of the things that might otherwise go wrong. In the same way they talk about automatic, artificial intelligence with weapons. Should there be a human being decides, yes, we politically kill somebody or not, or should let the machine decide life and death? I think there's a dimension there on the ethical side that is important to somehow build into your system. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for the question, Arthur. I think that humans remaining involved and occupying the most judicious functions is essential to a system like this working on human values. Unlike many other organizations and experiments, we're not interested in outsourcing decision-making to computers or to algorithms. We want to include them in amplifying some of our core capabilities. And those core capabilities are in our written expression, finding bias in our language, helping us see common ground, those kinds of cognitive functions. I think the judicious functions of, do we go left or right? Under what conditions do we wage war? Under what conditions do we pursue diplomacy? These are science-informed, argument-informed, but human-derived decisions. And our system will always sort of maintain those values because we believe that that's where humans can shine best, is sort of deciding on those types of things. The other thing I would mention is humans inform what direction we want to go in. They set out the challenges that they're looking for solutions on. So they have ultimate say on defining the parameters of what is acceptable and what isn't. The AI or other tools there have zero say in that. They're just there to help you improve the way you write something.
Love that. That's great. Beautifully said. Jerry, you are up. So go right ahead.
Soushiant, I love the system. I think that's very interesting that you can have more participation and change the way politics is done. The question I have is about money in politics. In the US, money in politics is very big, and it gives us some very bad decisions. How do you see your system taking the money out of politics? Do you see that as a benefit or still a potential problem?
Yeah, great question. I think it fundamentally removes the issue of sort of the causes of abuse of power and special interests. I think one person, one vote, one membership fee determines the budget that you're going to be, deciding upon. I don't think like a company can come and say, we are a person and we're going to contribute $1 million so we get 1 million votes on this platform. It won't work that way. I give you one really good example of a kind of out there experiment. A friend of mine put an idea together about a virtual country. Virtual country based on a certain set of human values, a certain set of social values, environmental values, and they wanted to implement a decision-making system like Sway. It was called The Good Country. And you would become a good citizen. You'd get a passport and all this sort of stuff. But you had to contribute a membership fee every year. It was $5 per user per year. And the aggregate total of this budget was, they had projected over 5 years would be $1.4 billion. No corporate interests, no nothing. It's just individuals with similar values coming to decide how these should be spent to bring the kinds of things we want to see in the world come into existence through a fair merit-based process. I think, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
That sounds awesome. Wow. Okay, Bharat, you're next. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Bharat is a key member of Citizen for Global Solutions in Minnesota. It was part of our first broadcast of our film.
Thanks very much. My question, it's kind of follows the thread of the last two questions. And before I frame the question, I want to read a quotation, something that Mahatma Gandhi said when advising to the politicians who will have to address complex questions of society, of poverty, hunger, and climate, and so on. How should they go in making that decision? This is what he said. If you're ever in doubt, bring before your eyes the face of the poorest man you have seen and ask yourself, what if what you're about to do will benefit him? Then you'll find your doubts and yourself melt away. So my question is, the crowdsourcing and all of your methodology is great. I appreciate that in decision-making, democracy, and so on, removing, the confirmation bias and all that. But what I'm concerned about is that most of the world, which really needs, millions and millions, hundreds of millions who are going to be starving, people who have less than $1 a day to live, how can they be, their voices can be incorporated in what we do and make the system much more meaningful to the lives, of people everywhere around the world? That's the question. And I guess the question I have is, are there technological ways, some systems, some experiments going on that are actually field experiments which involve these people and in some way develop models that includes them?
Beautiful question. Go ahead.
Yeah, very good question, Bharat. And I really appreciate the call for empathy, really, in the core of your question. Sadly, I think we have leaders in the world that lack this function, lack the ability to be empathetic beyond their subset of interests. And Mahatma Gandhi's wisdom is a call to educate ourselves and to become more selfless and whatnot. I don't think we can rely on this as a long-term and sustainable solution. I do think that tools that are premised on the legitimacy of inclusion will give us more chances to include those that have never had a voice. One of the core problems that I experienced and I read about was those that have insights or something to contribute don't have the same language skills. So the folks on this call, you throw them in any environment, they will be able to navigate and maneuver and request change and advocate for things because they have very strong language skills. They have ways of packaging up their ideas in compelling ways to decision makers. But those without those skills don't. And this is a common problem in a lot of participatory experiments that have been done. Those with the best language skills from a certain demographic background capture the number of ideas that are processed and turned into decisions. But if you make these tools accessible to everybody and you use AI in ways to help people better express their ideas, you're trying to level the playing field so that not just those with good language skills have their ideas expressed, but everyone does. That's in a lot of ways what we're passionate about. We're deeply, deeply passionate about. And we are working with some friends in India to find self-managed communities, indigenous communities that already operate on a consensus-based decision-making model to try to deploy these things in Bihar and in other parts of India. I don't know of many other experiments that have happened or have been successful in this either. And maybe ours won't be either, but it's certainly core to why we exist.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I do see
Can
that.
Can I just say one thing? Thank
Sure.
you very much. I would love to connect with you because I'm involved right now in India. We're trying to focus on how we can end severe malnutrition, which is a huge problem for children. And we've had some successes and continue to work on it. And it'll be interesting to see if there is a way to connect with some of the technologies to
Sure. We have a great partner and a former colleague from Singularity who went back to India, and he's worked with so many self-managed communities, indigenous communities there. I've left you my email address, and the email address is open to everyone else on the call.
You.
Please connect, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Right. Wow. I think that's a great connection. I love to see when we get connections that can carry on. Now, also tell us, how can we go to SWAI-AE and sign up to be on your newsletter, interact, to try out these tools? How can all of us actually be engaged in both supporting you and following up and being a part of this exciting adventure?
Yeah, so there are sign-up forms on our site. We publish case studies and thoughts and things like this pretty regularly, at least once or so, or twice a month. Feel free to sign up on the website and we'll get them to you. We have a Medium page that we publish a lot of our things on too, that I can share in a second. But most of you are part of organizations, and some are member-based organizations that, make decisions or pass laws or change things. And I think if you see an opportunity to try sway in your member-based organizations or companies you lead, or municipalities you belong to or boards that you sit on, we'd be very, very interested in talking and seeing how we can support you. We've done so many different experiments, from very large citizen-driven feedback projects to small teams using it to crowdsource the next investment decision. And most recently, helping Doctors Without Borders in Canada to digitize their annual general meeting so that everyone that was in the field could be involved in the policy change and policy suggestion process. So
We're having
you have
Thursday, a Rotary meeting, kind of brainstorming things. I'd love you to come up and suggest the idea. We'll give you the link afterwards that maybe a Rotary e-club of world peace could become a use the tool.
Yeah, I think where we've seen it gets traction and support is if there's something consequential and imminent to discuss. If there's
Right.
some kind of policy change that's on the table, if there's an investment decision coming up, if there's a strategy change that's happening, you want consensus or convergence on, we have a really great tool for it. And this helps to de-risk the product for us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so happy to have you on. By the way, Gary Davis did experiment with doing his integrity system he talked about with the poorest African women or refugees in Africa, and they're incredibly intelligent. And yes, people at the very bottom do have incredible skills to interact with this, and so many of them have phones now. And once they have the tools that instantly translate and instantly put their words into language other people can understand, there's so much that can be done in this area. So this has been very, very exciting. We love having you on. We can't wait to continue to have Mr. Dahl on as well, Arthur Dahl, and then and continue this dialogue. So thank you everyone for being a part of this. And thank you especially Soushiant. This has just been extraordinary. And I want to turn it back over to Melanie to close the meeting.
Yay, oh yes. Incredible, thank you, and thanks for staying a little bit later. It's great discussion, everyone. Thank you very much. And if you have not joined the club yet, I'd like to recommend just going to theworldsmycountry.com/club, and the 2 months are free. And also our short, The World is My Country, is right now during the crisis available online free. So go to theworldismycountry.com. And actually, I'd like to pass it back to Arthur. Can you introduce the next guest we're going to have next week?
Oh, well, we have a very good friend of mine that deals with the crucial issue of nonviolence. David Hartsoe, he's the founder of the Nonviolent Peace Force. Now, this is a force that actually has hundreds of people around the country in key conflict areas actually doing peacemaking on the ground. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that in the incredible books of Gene Sharp throughout Eastern Europe, the most powerful, huge, Soviet empire crumbled to nonviolent people power. I met personally with Landsbergis, who led the singing revolution that was the first to break away from the Soviets, and people singing in the streets and singing joyous songs. The tank drivers just couldn't crush them. Or we saw that fellow in China who the tanks turned around. Nonviolence can be the most powerful force in the world. And right now, as the U.S. moves toward a very dangerous situation where a lot of people are egging on, pushing for violence, and where violence is exactly what they want to bring on the repression and the horrors that could entail. It's so important that we begin to learn the tools of nonviolence. So do join us next week for the remarkable discussions with David Hartsoe, co-founder of World Beyond War and of the Nonviolent Peace Force. So that's every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1700 at Greenwich Mean Time. We have people around the world joining us here from all over, Australia, Canada, everywhere. So come join us next week and every week for some exciting solutionary discussions on how we build the world we choose.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.